Before this Halloween-themed edition of the podcast, Mr. Osgar has asked me to issue a warning. This edition is set to delve into the very depths of human spookiness. It will thrill you. It may shock you. It may even horrify you. This is horror.
Chris, sorry. It's not a Halloween special. It's not a Halloween special. I think you've misread Craig's notes.
Well, aren't we reviewing Halloween?
Yeah, this is not, I know, but it's not a Halloween episode. I'm sorry.
You mean I brought out my barely possible Christopher Lee voice for nothing? Ridiculous.
Sarah, put away the candles. Quick.
I even got a human sacrifice ready. This is unbelievable.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained?
I am the father.
Great Scott!
I'll be back.
Here's Johnny.
Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
It's not the matter. It's a silly musical. I'll get you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which movies are well worth watching and which deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Osgar, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Craig.
And over in VHS Corner this week, we're joined by
Sarah Williams.
And joining us in the movie vault, we have
Christopher Maxwell.
And we're all happy and all very pleased to be here, apart from maybe one person, especially after that little hiccup at the beginning. Are you okay, Craig?
This is just a joke to you. Like, no integrity, no, moral consistency, I swear to God.
Couldn't help ourselves. And you should expect this, Craig, because I think you should be a bit nervous, because you realise what this ensemble is.
Yeah, pro-horror.
Well, no, but also the Demolition Man crew are back.
Oh, for
So we're in for an interesting one today, guys. But enough teasing. Without further ado, let's get to what film is causing so much commotion for Craig. So, Craig, can you please catch us up on last time's episode, what we'll be discussing, and how we came to talk about today's film?
Yeah, so in last episode, in our end game, which was Too Fast, Too Fury Road, it was Shelley versus Johan in a battle of how long are various car scene chases in films. And in the end, Johan was able to come out on top. And what does he decide to do with that prestigious honor of choosing a film? He decides to take us back to October for some damn reason, and decides that, despite the fact that we're currently in summer, the amount of things that we could be discussing right now that would be, seasonally, thematically appropriate, he decides to give us the 2018 film Halloween. That beautifully, beautifully summery film going forward. Right, so what is this Halloween film about then? So, in this film, Laurie Strode confronts her longtime foe, Michael Myers, the masked figure who has haunted her since she narrowly escaped his killing spree on Halloween night 4 decades ago. Halloween night. Halloween, as in October 31st. Anyway, who's involved in this film? So, this is directed by David Gordon Green. Has a variety of different things under his belt. So, he obviously directs this Halloween film, as well as the other Halloween films that follow on directly from this, Halloween Kills, Halloween's End. But he also had his start out doing a variety of different dramas, like George Washington, comedies like Pineapple Express and Your Highness, and just a variety of different other things that we can credit to him going forward. This was written by David Gordon Green, in collaboration also with Jeff Fradley and Danny McBride, surprisingly enough, with original writing credits going to Deborah Hill and John Carpenter. This was edited by Timothy Alverson, cinematography by Michael Simmons, production design by Richard A. Wright, composer John Carpenter, Daniel Davis, and Cody Carpenter, and finally costume design by Emily Gunshaw. So this boasts a cast. We now have the now Oscar winner of Jamie Lee Curtis in the role of Laurie Strode. We also have Judy Greer as Karen, Andy Matichak as Allison, James Jude Courtney and Nick Castle both taking on what is just simply called The Shape, Halleck Bill as Dr. Sartain, Will Patton as Officer Hawkins, Rian Reeds as Dana Haynes, Jefferson Hall as Aaron Corey, Toby Huss as Ray, Virginia Gardner as Vicky, and a variety of different other characters going forward. So, that is 2018's Halloween, which, of course, in and of itself is a sequel to the 1978 film Halloween, because I get the feeling that it's not bad enough that we're discussing one Halloween film. I get the feeling that these guys are going to make me discuss 2 Halloween films today. So yeah, have at it, pricks.
Probably more than 2.
So let's talk all about Halloween from 2018 and ask the question of whether it deserves the honor of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. So yeah, we are talking about a very famous movie franchise here, something linked to John Carpenter as well, which, as Craig mentioned, is known for his music, especially in this film, but also then directing, writing, so has been involved in things such as Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, and then this, franchise, this film sort of rocketed to multiple films, which we've seen with the likes of, Alien, Terminator, many other horror films, in which it just seems to churn out sequels, which very often are not well regarded or received. And I guess that this 2018 one was then seen as a reboot, which is happening quite a lot, even especially within this year. I think we've had like The Omen, and like not long ago we had Exorcist. We've had so many like horror franchises which have tried to be rebooted and had sequels to them recently. And of course, within the past few years, we've had like the return of the Scream franchise. So, Sarah, am I right in thinking this might be the first time you've actually talked about a horror film on this podcast, which would be surprising considering you are kind of a horror gal?
Yeah, I think it is actually. I think, a specific horror. There's always horror elements in most films, but yeah, I love this kind of genre of film. You mentioned Scream, which is one of my favorites, as she holds a Scream cup to the screen. But yeah, I love this kind of slasher, this thing following you, whether it's, in sci-fi or straight up horrors. It's genuinely really terrifying, the concept of being chased. So it's a specific genre that I love, is this kind of slasher thing. And, the original Halloween sort of stemmed that, and the final girl. So yeah, it's kind of iconic.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in with this one, is specifically like the fact that it is, the slasher genre. Obviously, there's a lot of subgenres within horror, gore, the kind of like more fantasy kind of like, or jump scare kind of ones. But yeah, slashers, definitely have, a very strong hold within horror. And yeah, I was kind of interested in your opinion on this, or slashers in general, because in a way, I guess, is Scream kind of seen, as a parody or a pastiche of those? Is it because of your love of it that then you like Scream because of that, or is it so different from the rest?
I think I sort of really got into horror in the last sort of maybe like 5 years ago or something like that. And I think it's when I saw the Scream franchise, I was like, oh, okay, you can be smart with your horror and satirize it all. And then obviously, I go back and watch classics like, Hellraiser, Candyman, Halloween, whatever it may be. This kind of genre and the subgenres are just so fascinating to me. And things like Scream, I think, just have something quite it has something to say, and sort of like plays up to itself, and is very meta in that way. And I think that's why it breaks boundaries, and the original 1996 shapes the way in which horrors are viewed and written and perceived. So obviously, like I say, Halloween is one of the OGs up there, like Texas Chainsaw, in terms of slashers. So they're sort of classics for a reason, but I think the 90s really shifted that for me. So I sort of sat up and paid attention through the Scream franchise, and I fell in love with genre as a whole.
Do you have much opinion on the overall Halloween franchise? Or is it kind of mainly just the more like recent ones and the original, which you have more of an affiliation to, having gone through more of the classics more recently?
I'll be honest, before this film, before I found out what film we were talking about for this podcast, I'd only ever seen Halloween the original. I've never seen any of the other in the giant franchise that it is, though I know there's some fan favorites and some that I should miss. Yeah, and then watching this, I've watched Halloween 2018 and Kills and Ends for this. So yeah, I've got a whole kind of scope. But people said I could do that. They said, you know, you don't need to worry about the rest in between. Just go straight to 18 and you're fine. And they were right. So yeah,
Don't say that. Don't not have to wait till Craig.
No, this is also what friends of mine told me after I went and watched the first two. So yeah, thanks, David.
Because Sarah could have turned around and been like, I think it's imperative that Craig watch Kills and Ends as well as the 2018 version.
It doesn't matter. It's probably best you don't look at those films, to be honest. But yeah.
Well, there's definitely a mixed bag of, from what I've seen, you know, again, I was kind of like new to this franchise, you know, horror as a whole. Sometimes I've seen some of the classics, you know, a lot of my favorite kind of stuff is more going back, you know, well into like the, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s, kind of when it was overlapping with sci-fi and things like that. Maybe some more of the like more modern ones, but again, a lot of them, if they're just kind of jump scares or things which kind of focus on just like, oh, isn't this psychotic? It just doesn't appeal to me. So I think that definitely someone here which is going to know the good, the bad, and the ugly of, you know, franchises like this is Mr. Christopher Maxwell. It's quite a mouthful there. And I guess John Carpenter would be a big one for you, because I think even maybe when you first came on the podcast, The Thing is something that you mentioned.
Yeah, I've pretty much been a big horror fan since a teenager, and a lot of John Carpenter's work, particularly the first Halloween, big films I really much enjoy. The first actual Halloween film I saw though was actually Halloween 4. I didn't watch the first one until a few years later. And of all of the films that exist, which I think is 11 now, I can't honestly remember off the top of my head. There's only 2 I've not seen.
Okay.
But I've seen most of them, and I will be honest, not all of them are very good. In fact, most of them are pretty bad. Which is depressing, because the first film really did set a really high bar for that sort of genre of film, and what I think the first film does brilliantly that no other film seems to capture is atmosphere. And it's not a very violent film, but it's a genuinely quite unnerving and unsettling movie, and it's done really well, and all the sequels really fail to recapture that, which is a shame. But in terms of what they created with Michael, they definitely created a really iconic horror character. And I think that's something that horror definitely, no matter how good or bad a film is, horror is always good at creating iconic killers. And Michael Myers is probably top 5, maybe even top 3.
Fair. Well, as I said with the franchise, you know, it's not something which I, you know, for years, ironically, at the time of, you know, Halloween, when it actually is October, I'm usually like, oh, I should watch this. But, you know, it's again, so many other horrors are out at that time and things. There's so many you can sort of delve into. Interestingly, on this podcast, we have actually talked about Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. So, Craig, remind me of your thoughts on that one. I'm not sure if that even gives us a gauge as to what your opinions might be on these other ones, but I'm trying to remember what you thought of it.
I think I found it relatively inoffensive but odd.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing about it that I found sort of horrendous. I think the elements of where it was able to scare me, it did. I think there were elements of it that I found probably a bit stupid. Like, I know when it got to like sort of the end and it's just the mass distribution of whatever that sort of sound wave was, I was losing it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, obviously, from what I understand as well, is that it is nothing like the other Halloween films. So you're right. I don't know how you could ever use that as a gauge of what would I think of this franchise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of expectations of the franchise, regardless of whether it's the original or this new one, I think it's always going to be, a lot of people will always know The Mask, or like, you know, Laurie, you know, the typical tropes of this in terms of like, you know, the person standing away through the window, a lot of those kind of classic things, that's affiliated with this film, and this has influenced a lot of stuff out there, and then being like referenced in so many other things like sitcoms and other movies, etc., etc. So yeah, it's definitely has this stamp, and I think that I think Johan's link was interesting again because obviously he was talking about Mad Max, which was then another franchise from years ago, and then came back out with a sort of like reboot with Fury Road, and then this was then meant to be that this was similar and also has like a sort of badass female character in it. And then interestingly, like Sarah says, it's then gone on to have two other films as well.
To be clear, David, you're not going to sell me on the fact that Johan did a good job at choosing an appropriate film.
Well, I'm just adding context to the fact of...
No, especially when you say, like, the link is interesting in that this was a sequel reboot like Mad Max Fury Road was. I'm like...
It's still June, isn't it?
Yeah.
And funny enough, I messaged Craig earlier. I was driving in to work today, and on Radio 1, they have the, like, Ask the Nation. So it's like controversial opinions, should... whatever cream go on first or jam on scones, whatever. And somebody asked, should Christmas specials be watched at any other time of the year apart from Christmas? And again, something we've often talked about on the podcast is Craig determined to never do that. If he's watching a series, which this girl on Ask the Nation said that they always skip it, but she said the danger of it is, do you have like a big collection of Christmas episodes to watch back then when it gets to December? But Craig is an adamant one for not watching those in a run through of a series, and we'll wait until December. So again, it's similar vibes now of the Christmas, Halloween stuff. People were ringing in and leaving messages like, no, Easter, Halloween, no, none of it can be watched apart from the relevant times of year. Which I think...
Please tell me that was the predominant opinion that won in the end.
Pretty much, yeah. But I think there was...
People have a point!
Craig's just there like with a board like to Johan. Please observe. Chris, what was your general experiences with this rebooted trilogy, if you will, before?
So I've actually was thinking a lot about this coming into this review, and because I remember when I first watched this, because I watched it in the cinema when it was released in the UK, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was it captured a lot of really cool elements. I really liked the full circleness of it as well. But I think as time goes on and the more I watch it, and also with the context of Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, which by the way, I actually haven't seen Ends because I hated Kills so much.
I think I remember you saying this on the podcast as well, actually.
Yeah. So like, I've still not watched Halloween Ends. I don't know if I will. I know what happens in it. I've watched and read reviews. But the problem I have now is like, at the time, I felt like this Halloween could have been a perfect end to the franchise because it comes full circle. I think it did recapture some of the feeling that it had from the original movie. Obviously, there's some modern elements to it. Not all of it lands, personally. I think there's some weird sort of SNL style improv comedy in it that it doesn't really land for me in some places. I'll probably touch on it a bit later. But overall, I thought this would be a great way to end it because it does what the original does. It leaves it open-ended, but there's enough here that you could think that this could be it. And there's the final visual of the 3 generations of Strode escaping from Michael was very well done. And the fact they followed it up with not just 2 more movies, but by all accounts, 2 very bad films, kind of taints it for me. And I know you should always look at a film in isolation and you shouldn't really judge it by its predecessors or its successors and everything like that. But for me, those sequels do undo a lot of what that first film did for me. And I feel as the time goes on, I enjoy it less and less as a result of it, which is a shame, to be honest with you. Because I do remember really liking it when it first came out, but it's just time doesn't always favor a film, really, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's ironic that a franchise that has sequels called Kills and Ends, in which it literally is like people like, yes, please kill this or please let it end.
I always got the vibe when they were making this new Halloween that we're going to finally end it. Because they've always tried to end it. They've never gotten around to ending it. And a lot of that is to do with weird contractual obligations with the character of Michael, which is just outrageous when you think about it. But yeah, and now I hear rumors that they want to bring it back again. And I'm like, for God's sake, just let it die.
It makes it sound
you
as
know
if...
it's bad when a horror fan like Chris is saying, "Yeah, stop it."
Because it's more just a case of like, you've got some bad ones, you've got some really good ones, but the more you do it, the worse you're going to outdo the ratio, and you're going to end up with more crap than you are good. And even just from a purely creative perspective, and just the idea of making new content, just do something new, do something different. Because when you do find something new, you might end up with something that will be spoken about in the same regard as Halloween, not just because it is also Halloween. Like it's like, oh, it's a Halloween movie. Yeah, but it's crap. But this movie, which isn't a Halloween movie at all, it's actually really good. Ironically, you talked about Season of the Witch, the third one. I think that's one of the better sequels. And that was originally done to completely revamp the franchise. They wanted to do an anthology.
Yes,
so if that film had done well, we would have never had any Michael Myers films after. Well, we probably would have. Someone would have brought him back at some point.
Yes,
maybe, but I don't think we would have had nearly as much behind it as possible.
Well, it depends how strong this contractual obligation. I'm just imagining, is it like the character of Michael Myers? Like, is it just like every time a Hollywood executive is just like, right, we don't need to bring that character back now, and then just do looks outside the window and he's just there like,
just sits straight up.
Yeah, you must do another franchise.
You would have thought he would have been satisfied with just being a Dead by Daylight.
True.
Yeah. I think he's wicked in Dead by Daylight. As a matter of fact, he's really fun to play.
Yeah, isn't he like one of the only characters in that game with like an instant kill?
Yeah.
Has he ever had a versus kind of like, Freddy versus Jason kind of moment?
Not an official capacity, but there's like fan films, and to be fair, they're quite fun.
Okay.
Just two big meatheads smashing each other.
But you know what Chris is in this situation? He's just that kid in the Simpsons episode with Krusty with the Hamburglar, and he's just like Michael Myers is just the burglar, which has just been beaten up by Homer, and Chris is just that little kid who's just like, just stop, he's already dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you think you can kind of, like, you've just watched all of this trilogy, do you think it's possible to kind of summarize your opinions of this film without talking about the trilogy, or vice versa? Do you think it's possible to talk about the two sequels without talking about the first one?
It better bloody had be, I swear to God.
I think Chris hit the nail on the head. I think the first one, in a self-contained story, is pretty good in terms of bringing back legacy characters, introducing new things, playing homage to the original, but bringing in new things. And then the second and third one do kind of undo that, and they go on side quests that I didn't ask for, and they really kind of milk it. But it has tainted my, like Chris says, it's tainted my view a little bit, the first one. I've watched it twice now for this podcast. That's dedication. But yeah, no, I think it is the best one out of the three. Like Chris says, you could end it at one and kind of leave it at that. But yes, knowing what I know of the three, yeah, it's a weird new trilogy reboot, requel, whatever they want to call it. Yeah, it's weird. I can't remember what the question was, David.
Just I guess you kind of answered the summary of the franchise, whatever. So we can then focus on the 2018 one, I guess. Were you satisfied by the ending? Does it end?
It does end.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very similar to Chris. I think I was like, oh, because I never saw these in the cinema. I was like, oh, I'll just, for whatever reason, I'll just YouTube the ending of Halloween Ends, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's definitely ended. So I didn't know what happened in Kills, and then I didn't know really what the context was in Ends. But yeah, it's definitely worth watching. I would watch the two just for enjoyment and just like what the hell is going on kind of thing. But it does conclude it as well, so it's worth a watch. But you could also just not. You could stay at 2018 as like, oh, it's quite good, but yeah.
So we'll ship off now Kills and Ends, so we can not talk about those. ever again. So what is your general thoughts, and revisiting, as you said twice, Halloween 2018 isolated on its own?
Yeah, there's definitely some things that I noticed on the second watch. First watch, I got the kind of shock value. I think there's some really, really nice kind of horror elements of gore, seeing legacy characters come back and like some badass moments. And then the second time, I kind of saw the flaws, which a lot of people have mentioned, which is the comedy. I think the problem is Danny McBride is one of the writers who is known for what is it?
Pineapple
what's he done?
Express and things like
Pineapple
that.
Express, This Is the End, those kind of comedy films that don't personally work for me. And the comedy
Stoner
in this,
comedy, basically.
yeah, it's just not my kind of thing. And it cuts through these it's really dramatic film for a lot of the time. And then you have like cops talking about sandwiches or brownies. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like this, it's adding nothing. I don't know who these characters are. Like there's a lot of comical lines throughout. And I was just like, what the? So I could see a lot more negatives second watch, but the first one I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. Laurie Strode is badass. Like this, the whole matriarchy was badass. So really, really good on the first watch. Second time I started, I was like, oh, actually, 2 weeks had passed, and I was like, maybe not as perfect. But yeah, I still think it's the best out of the three.
And the moment we've been waiting for, Craig, what do you make of Halloween 2018, and has the original influenced these thoughts?
I'm ignoring that second question. I think, to much people's surprise, I actually like this film. I think for me, the thing that this film really, really sells is just how much like Laurie's sort of PTSD about the moment is just effectively just, I don't want to say turned her into like a similar sort of mythical character, but she definitely seems like she's had to adopt some of the things that like made Mike Myers so terrifying in order to fight him off, right? Like especially in the fights, the sort of the combat scene at the end, I was very impressed that they did moments with her, like she just disappears after she's sort of cut away from, the way she'll like emerge out of the darkness, just the ferocity to which she will go at him, and just moments that every other character, when we've seen in those situations, we would think, okay, they're dead. She just finds some way, like she's biting the guy on the knuckles, for crying out loud. It's just it's really intense, but also just, I think they do a really good job of just actually showing sort of the price she's had to pay for that. Like the fact that her family sort of, for the most part, treat her as if she's like as inhuman as Michael is, right? The fact that she's now having to sort of live off in the cabin in the woods all on her own. The fact that they're not inviting her out for like certain family functions unless really pressured. And even when she comes out, she's like an absolute nervous wreck and just doesn't know how to deal with things. So yeah, I think they just did a very good job at like creating her character to be a parallel, so that when it comes to the end sequence, and by the by, I do think it's a bit extreme that she felt that like the ultimate way out was turning her house into a pressure cooker bomb. But at the same time, it is a fantastic image. Just seeing those spikes come across and he's just stood there staring and just starting the fire. Yeah, no, I think they do a great job with that story. If anything, I wish they'd spent more time with her character, because they obviously fill out a lot of the rest of this film with just, as Chris has alluded to, just many more kills than actually happened in the original film. Like, he kills a good, like, I want to say like 10 people. Maybe even more. He just goes for insane kills. The other thing that I think works for me as well is that, because one thing that I often don't like about, say, modern stories based on like old properties, is that when it comes to like the sort of cross culture clash of different things that didn't exist like 40 years ago, there's sort of really, really corny, unnecessary sort of distinctions. Whereas the only thing they do with that here is just the sort of the true crime like podcasters rightfully get what they deserve by trying to taunt a guy with the mask. And that was a bit of a stupid scene where they're holding up the mask and all the prisoners are sort of like crying as if there are like, evil spirits in that mask. I think that was a bit stupid for me, but at the same time, I did appreciate just how horrifically they are killed because of the fact that they're trying to like follow the story, and I'm just like, yeah, I vibe with this. So I actually had a good time with this film. I think Sarah's right. I think a lot of the sort of more comic, trying to be sort of like down to earth sort of moments don't work for me. I think the stupid like high school drama at like the dance doesn't do it for me, especially considering that it's just so inconsequential to what actually happens. But it's stuff that I'm just able to just ignore. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of similar. I think that knowing that there's so many like bad entries, etc., that knowing that this is one of the more well-received ones, and I definitely see that, and I think that like visually this film is quite strong at a lot of times. It has some good sort of like horror moments and some sort of good setup. And again, like Sarah was saying before, is that, when you can have a bit more substance to your horror films, I think that's when I struggle with them, when it's just pure like, oh my God, run away from this, or isn't this scary, or it's just only about like one kind of thing in which like, what's in the attic, what's this, I think, and when characters are obviously just being stupid, the classic, like, why are you walking down there? Why have you like, gone down this creepy corridor with nobody with you? That kind of thing. I appreciated here that, again, there was a lot of characters which were just kind of like acknowledging that, I think of like the, sort of babysitter scene in which like the boy that she's like babysitting is just like a lot of the times like, oh, hell no, I'm like, getting out of here. What is going on?
Oh, I did love the fact that the moment like the first slash happens at that house, he's literally just like, oh shit,
yes.
and just runs.
Yeah.
Love that kid.
And just, the fact that like the sort of boyfriend or whatever you want to call him, they don't try to go for like the sort of like typical kind of like jock savior sort of moment. The fact that you just see him and then next to him, he's dead. You're like, okay, cool. And I think that, it is just that idea of bringing back the whole like babysitter scenario and like it happening on Halloween night. And somebody, who's being looked after, the whole thing when like the kid's under the sheet and the cops like going up to him, it all works quite effectively. And I think a lot of like the lighting in that scenario with the fish tank and a lot of other scenes like work really well. Something that really bugged me in the actual original film is the fact that it didn't even look like Halloween. It was like summer. And I was like, why does this not look like Halloween? So the fact that this film is very kind of crisp, autumnal, orange leaves and stuff like that, I was like, okay, we've visually got the right sort of aesthetic here. And I think that Laurie's kind of like house, etc., I think adds to that as well. The kind of like defensiveness, like is echoed like in her character, is then seen through the house. And I think that again it walks that line. I think that sometimes you may have a franchise, say like DC or something, in which you're like, yeah, it was fine, it was good, which just means that there's so many bad films that like it's your number two because it's kind of such a low bar. So I can imagine maybe this is kind of one of those films in which it's like a lot higher up for people just because there's so many other bad ones. But not to say that this is just a mediocre film. I think it has a lot of good stuff in it. I think like Craig, I think I'm just disappointed that there wasn't a bit more to certain elements of it. I wish that there was a bit more of the exploration of Michael and Lowry. I think the family kind of trauma, I think, could have been explored a bit more. And probably I didn't sort of pick up on the humor as much as an issue. I actually didn't mind that scene with the cops. I kind of found that a bit of like a refresh because there was so much of the like, where's he now? Like, he's on the run. He's going to chase after this person. I kind of found that scene kind of refreshing, to be honest. It was kind of just like a bit of a realistic moment. I just liked the kind of like, oh, we're just sat here and like, what the hell's going on over there? But I can see what you mean in terms of maybe other parts of the film. Like the dad has some weird humor in which he's talking about peanut butter and stuff like that. And I'm like,
started on Ray, David. Oh my God.
Yeah.
The worst character in this film.
Yes, yeah. So I didn't understand what he was meant to be doing. Probably my two biggest problems are the fact that I think the 80s aesthetic doesn't quite work for me as much here as well. I think the fact that because it's not set in the 80s, and the fact that they're using the same font, the same music, and sometimes the same feel, I'm like, but this isn't like Stranger Things. This isn't set in that time period. So I don't think that the music for me quite works. I think there's times in which it does, and there's some moments which I'll talk about later, but like where some like guitar and stuff comes in. There was a scene which came up, where it was on my notes. Oh yeah, when he enters, what was it? When he enters by gate, I don't know. When he enters the gate, anyway. But there was a bit in the score in which I was like, yeah, this is like badass. And there was some really cool like moments in which like the guitars came in, or when they sort of play around a bit more with the theme, and it turns a bit more orchestral or a bit more rocky. And I don't have a problem with it just kind of using the original score, but I think it's just the fact that the opening is kind of like, in reference to the original film, and then the font is the exact same, and then there's so many parts in the film which play out like an 80s, 70s horror. I'm like, it doesn't quite work with the modern aesthetic though, and especially because the film is going for such depth and realism as well. I don't think that those quite meld together. And then my other problem is Judy Greer as Karen. I don't think she's well cast as this character, unfortunately. I don't know, again, if it's just maybe I've seen her in too many kind of light comedic roles, but I felt that character should have been played by somebody a bit more kind of gritty, somebody who could have kind of like shown that kind of trauma a bit more. One of my pet peeves and bits I really didn't like was when she was just like, now let me tell you my childhood, and then it just like cut to the flashback, and it was just like done in just like a really, like you said, SNL kind of way, and I was just like, why are you being like intentionally comedic about what's meant to be quite a dramatic moment? So I think that she didn't help in not selling that. And I think for the type of character, again, it goes back to my issue of there could have been a bit more meat there of like this daughter who's been put through all this horrific stuff. And I think they just always surface level with it. She's always just kind of like, oh, I had a terrible childhood, and why did you do this? And she's like, I'm sorry, but this is why we've done it. And, it's just glazed over all the time. I'm like, come on, give it to me. I want more, It's almost as if the granddaughter maybe didn't need to be there, and it could have just been about them. But overall, I still think that it is fun at a lot of times. It's got a lot of great kills, as we said, great visuals, and is a strong horror overall. Getting into more of the kind of nitty gritty of it, Chris, what's some of the standouts for you in like revisiting this? Then, like you said, you were kind of like your thoughts were tainted by the sequel, but kind of looking at this in isolation, is it the performances that stand out to you? The visuals, like you said, the action. What is it that sort of is at the forefront?
I definitely think the action, when there's a great sequence where he's just going from like house to house, killing people, and it's all this tracking shot, and it's so well done, and it's very violent, which is in stark contrast to its original film. But it's sort of, we talk about this idea of like an 80s film in a modern aesthetic. I think that's one thing that this film I thought did quite well. And it's sort of, it's weird how, because the film sets up a very early scene with one of Allison's friends about like, no, he just killed a bunch of teenagers back, and it was very much seen as like, in this film in particular, it was just something that happened, and he's just going to go away. And then on Halloween night, he's back out again, and there's so much hustle and bustle. There's so many people out. Kids are going to big parties, and all the while, this maniac is going around killing, and no one notices it. And I thought that was really well done. It complete contrast to the original, where it's just two houses across the street from each other. This guy is now weaving in and out of all this modern chaos and this modern anarchy, and is getting away with it so much more successfully. I think the way they made him out to look, he's very intimidating. And I think the music you mentioned, the piece you were talking about, I think was I think it's called The Shape Chases Allison, where the way they got the effect of that guitar is really cool. So Cody Carpenter would run a bow from a double bass across the guitar to create that amazing roar effect.
Right.
It's one of the best pieces of music I've heard in a film.
Yeah, I would definitely describe it as a roar. So I think that is definitely what I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, because she finds her friend and he's been hung up on the gate.
That's it, yeah.
And then I think she sees him, and just the music amps up, and then she starts running. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah, there's some parts of it I think that were didn't really work. I think in terms of characters, his doctor, Dr. Sartain, I didn't particularly like his what he did, where he decided that because it's weird. He sort of feels like an allegory for the people who are obsessed with Michael versus Laurie, and obviously this film is built around that. Because he's the one who effectively sets Michael up. Because what I realized from rewatching is something that I think can be viewed as a flaw, but also can be viewed as kind of a strength of this film. He's not as obsessed with Laurie as Laurie thinks he is, but she's massively obsessed with him. And Craig, I think, touched on really nicely. Her obsession was so big that it would, and it's almost a sort of tragedy that she survived, and everything else about her life has fallen to pieces. And she's got a terrible relationship with her daughter. She's got a strange relationship with her granddaughter. She lives alone. She's constantly worried. She's trembling. She's always in fear of this Michael. And for Michael, he could have just disappeared into the asylum or into a highly maximum security prison and probably died eventually. But it's his doctor who helps him get out. And he just ends up getting killed. Michael just kills him. And then we get Laurie, and it just sort of happens through happenstance in a way. So it was a weird character choice and a weird decision to have him do that, in my opinion. I almost feel like the podcasters would have been a much better use for that sort of thing. Because I actually I know they were kind of annoying, it's the whole horror podcast thing. But I liked how obsessive they were. And it would have been I think it would have worked better if they did it. I think strengths of the film are the horror itself. Michael himself is really good. James G. Courtney, and I think Nick Castle returns to play Michael. They're just great. I sort of agree with Craig. I would have liked more of seeing Laurie struggle versus Alison's high school drama. Just it just, I don't know. There's a really cool story of survivors of surviving trauma that this film does well, but could have gone even further with, I think.
I completely agree about the doctor stuff. It was when he wore Michael's mask.
I know. I was like, did he
make room for my patient? I was just like, why are you doing this?
I thought there was going to be some weird thing that because I think he brought up some interesting elements. The fact that I think he said at one point that Michael and Laurie are drawn to each other, and it's their kind of want to kill each other that kind of draws them together, is it? So that they're addicts or something in that way. I thought that was interesting. So again, if it was that idea of he wants to see evil, as he said, this is an experiment and I'm interested in what is happening and who he is, and is he a being of pure evil? I think that's where sometimes I struggle with these kind of slasher films or just horror in general, when it's just purely oh well, they're just evil, and you're like, okay. And then it's just is there anything else? No, it's just evil, and you're like, there's just a mystical thing behind it, which I like fantasy and stuff, but when it's just pure nothing else barred just that one element, I've kind of struggled with. And I think that the first film gets by because, like you said, is the tension and the kind of situation, and there seems to be, again, maybe a bit more context there, because in this film he has this obsession with things babysitters, and then what he did to his sister, and then in this film maybe Laurie, and then the fact that there's a new trinity of women, and he's after then her daughter and her granddaughter, etc. So I think that the doctor playing into some of that is quite interesting, but you and Craig said, I think it's just weird then when he seems to have these moments of wearing the mask, because I was almost what is he thinks the mask is producing the evil? I was just is he gonna wear it and then be like, oh, I'm taking over, or something like that? I was a bit worried where we were going with that.
Yeah, to sort of go on a bit of a tangent again, it's kind of the biggest problem with all of the Halloween movies in general, and it's the big reason why I think John Carpenter has always wanted the franchise to just stay at the first movie. The more you try and dig into the logic of why Michael does it, the more it undoes the film.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird because every subsequent film has tried to explain it, a curse, a bloodline, obsession, this, that. And the more you learn about it, the more it sort of spoils it. And I think that's why, in essence, it should have ended when it did back in the 70s, because that mystery is so much more perplexing. And I know you sort of mentioned there, like, is he just pure evil, or how do you? And again, how do you portray that without him and Laurie having like no link at all? But they clearly are, and the film's built around that link. So it's sort of it does and it doesn't let that be the case. Oh, he's obsessed with Laurie, but it's more just about him killing. So which is it? And it's trying to ride this line of being we're destined to do this forever. This is, oh, he's just a mindless killer. Well, which is it? Because he can't be both. Really, he can't be both.
Agree, yeah.
Well, I think it works in this film because, like you said, it's the original is potentially like he's just maybe a mindless killer, or he's obsessed with this, like going back to where he's from or something like that. But then, then here he's like, right, well, this is the one that got away. I need to finish the job, kind of thing. So the idea that, both of them, like they need, I think at some point do they say, it's like she's like a hunter, that she needs to finally have that closure and kill Michael. So I think that works for this film. But again, it's just when you start to bring in the Doctor and you start to explore stuff a bit more, that's when it gets a bit convoluted. Similar to, like, I remember I haven't watched all of these because, again, similar narrative of they just got gradually worse. But I remember watching the first Paranormal Activity and being like, oh, actually, this is quite good. This is quite refreshing. And then when I heard about like what happened with the rest of the films, and somebody told me that the last one was like, oh, it was witches and they were cursed, and that's why all of this was happening. I was like, that is just so dumb. Why can't it just be something creepy in the attic and that's all it is? You never know. That's what makes it compelling. Sarah, you've had a lot of nods when we've been mentioning the Doctor. I mentioned the father, so I guess there's a lot of negatives, which I guess you agree with as well.
Yeah, I agree with the whole thing about the Doctor. I think obviously the purpose is there for him to sort of get out, and you sort of realise that on first watch, but obviously I knew that going second time in. But like he's just killed so quickly, and you're like, well, what was the point of this? Like, why, besides just getting him out, there is no kind of thing. And he puts the mask on, and I was like, okay, this is weird. Yeah, a weird additional character. I had to double check myself. I was like, was he in the first one? I was like, no, he's definitely not. He's just a random character that's just brought in for Halloween 2018. And when Chris was talking about trauma, I have to mention the Jamie Lee Curtis montage when she was doing the press for this film, and someone did like a supercut of her saying the word trauma, like it was in a joke way, but obviously that was the main thing about this film. And like, I think it's done in a semi-decent way, like we've talked about already. Her sort of coming to terms with it over, God knows how many years, 40, 50 years with this, and having her daughter and granddaughter and how that's affected them. It is about trauma ultimately, but it's just done in a funny way. And yeah, I'd highly recommend seeking it out, because that's all I thought of as watching this film. It's like Jamie Lee Curtis just saying trauma. But yeah, what else did I really enjoy about this film? I think what I noticed a lot more on the second time, and listened to what David Gordon Green was saying as a big fan of the Halloween films, was how a lot of the actions were mirrored. And I think we've alluded to this already, how like, there's the bit where Alison's in the classroom, she looks out the window and it's her grandma.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
That was Michael. So there's a lot of things flipped. She sits up, and's gone, just like Michael does. So I love that inverse of power. And we've said that throughout the whole of this podcast, really, of like, sort of, I don't know if she's sort of conquering it in some way by, the power role, and she lures him into this house, and, she's now becoming the hunter, so it's really interesting, that sort of dynamic, and I really appreciate that in this film, and the sort of matriarchy that comes with that. It's a real sort of strong female lead. I agree with you, Dave. I don't think Judy Greer is the greatest casting for Karen. Of course, the name's Karen. Yeah, I didn't think she was too strong, but the granddaughter and the grandma I loved. I think they were really sort of great dynamic, and they clearly had this bond that the mum wasn't interested in, so they were trying to fight that. But yeah, badass women. She's at a gun range, love that match cut when it's sort of with the bang, and then she's shooting the mannequins. Love that, and obviously that comes into play later on. Yeah, it's just a really, really well sort of self-contained story. I said before, my gripes, a lot of it is with that comedy. I think Ray is so annoying, so annoying. So when he pops it, I was like, good, good, get him out of
I
here.
do like how nobody is just like, I think Karen's a bit like, oh no, but like there's no like dad, like, oh, like there's no end to like, our father's gone, it's just like, no, okay, cool.
Yeah, so I was sort of glad that he sort of popped it, to be honest. But I think he was there as comic relief, but I don't think there was much comic elements to it personally that worked for me. Yeah, and like I think Craig said earlier, but the whole sort of house at the end, I love the traps, like, and this playing dumb, playing the kind of typical like femme fatale kind of hysterical woman, and then it kind of like switching and saying like, I can't do this, I can't do it. She's like, like I loved that, so good. So there are some really great moments, some great bits of dialogue, but also it does undercut a little bit with, some really bad writing. So it's give and take with this film, but generally really positive, I would say.
And I think the struggle with some of these things is like kind of like locations and like, the kind of rhythm of like, okay, the geography of like, where's this happening? That's why I think like, I was like, get to the house, because once we see it, like Craig said earlier, when the like spikes come in, you're like, this is such a cool set piece. I wish they had kind of got this sooner rather than messing around again with the doctor stuff and the police cars and everything like that.
Yeah,
I was like,
the school dance.
This is the gold stuff. Just get to the house, and I think that, there's a lot of references in this. Obviously, there's like when, like that scene with the boy and his father, that was quite like
what he says to his dad when he's like, oh, I want to go to dance class. So he's like, I don't want to go hunting or fishing. I was like, whoa, this feels really progressive for what seems really like a really suburban Midwest kind of place.
It was also nice to see that they'd found like a 12-year-old actor who smokes like 40 a day.
Raspy voice,
and also just he was a good actor as well. I think that, he generally sold that. I think like when he was like shouting for like his dad, but then at one point he said like daddy or something. And I was just like, oh, like, you really felt for that kid in that, like that moment of fear. And I think that, the fact that like all the patients were kind of like wandering around and stuff, it's like in the first film when they come across them and they're like, oh, what's happened to you? I think one missed opportunity was the fact that there was like a doll house, was it, in Lowry's house. And I was like, they should have made that like a replica of like the house from the first film or something. I was just like, how cool would that have been? Like, just even if it was just white, I was just like, that would have like been like, oh, like it would have told so much just within that. Especially if it caught fire at the end, you would have been like, cinema. I find it weird how the granddaughter kept calling Lowry like grandmother.
So I tweeted that as soon as I saw this film. I was like great film, but what the hell is that? Like, that is so unnatural. Like, Laurie seems like a cool like grandma, like she's like a, I don't know, like a nan or something like that. But even like, grandmother,
who says grandmother at all? Even if your nan is very old fashioned, like grandmother.
So like when talking about my grandmother, I will say my grandmother, but I wouldn't to her face say grandmother. I would say grandma. Except I wouldn't do anything now because she's been dead for over a year.
Well, but this is also you, Craig. You do tend to use full titles and names and stuff like that. But
but again, like when talking about the person, like when have you actually heard me say like mother to mum?
That's just stood out to me, of just the fact she goes in there, it's like grandmother like that's what just was so funny about it. Again, almost like some weird SNL comedy in that moment, but I don't know why they decided to go down that route. I think apart from like the music, that some of the visuals we mentioned, I think that's most of the stuff that like really stood out to me. I guess when it comes to like Michael as a killer, I don't know if like I find him all, I think that what we've already talked about, like maybe what is driving him, again, of like babysitters and going after like young people and having this revenge stuff, I think is quite compelling. But to be honest, I've always been surprised that he is such a big character. Like when I look at somebody like Freddy Krueger or someone like that, I'm like, oh yeah, makes sense. The hand, the face, the hat. I've always been surprised that Michael Myers is such a big iconic thing, because I've never looked at that mask and go, like Darth Vader or something. I don't go like, it's iconic because it has become iconic, but I can't really say why. Like, I don't look at that and just go like, oh, what a perfect piece of cinematic history. I think in this film, they do it really well because it's kind of like all worn. And I think when he holds it up, I think, I love that, like tiled floor that they have at the sort of like mental asylum and stuff like that. But just as a kind of horror character monster, if we're putting him up against, like Dracula and, Freddy Krueger, etc. I don't know. I don't rate him that much as an actual like villain. Do you know what I mean? I think that like the film itself, the story, the situation is the most compelling. But I don't know if just a guy with a knife going around in a boiler suit is that. Well, he's scary for the fact that he's always in the background, that kind of stuff. But I don't think visually as a character and what his abilities are is all that compelling to me.
I'm glad you brought up the mask, actually, because I think a big reason for him is sort of the uncanny valley of it. Just this pale white face, no eyes.
Yeah.
I remember when I first watched Halloween 4 as a boy, and that's one of the worst masks.
As a boy with your grandmother?
As a boy with my grandmother. But I was proper young when I saw it, and I do remember like that faceless face, in essence, what it is, really freaked me out. And there's something to be said about the uncanny valley, the not seeing the eyes and just seeing this visage, and then watching the original, seeing it the first time close up. It's so freaky. And one thing I will absolutely give this film, they bloody nailed the mask in this movie, because so many times they can't remake the original mask. This one just looks so good. They've aged it up, they've worn it up, they've made it look battered, but then you see it and you're like, that's the same mask, which obviously clearly isn't. But they did such a good job with that, and yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest prop I'll give this film, is that they nailed that mask, and they nailed him as that sort of character. It's sort of weird. I think there's something to be said about, because when you mentioned like Freddy and Jason and all these different characters, but Jason actually falls into this category. Just these big hulking Terminator characters, these horror characters that don't rely on quips or this, or they just walk around and he's just got a knife, but he doesn't need it, and that's what's so frightening about him. Like, he doesn't need it, but he has one anyway, and you can't see anything except just this mask, and it's very unnerving. And it feeds into that sort of thing of stalking and those sort of stalker killers. Very, very, very frightening. I think that's probably why I think he's so iconic, because he's not bombastic, he's not loud, but he's very intimidating.
I think the other thing on top of it as well is that, ironically, I think it's the lack of expression on the mask that I think resonates emotionally with a lot of people. The fact that, because what people try and rationalize in, say, fearful situations is this idea of maybe you can just talk someone out of doing something, but when it's clearly somebody who's wearing a mask that just shows like no desire, no joy, no pain, no sadness, it's just an unrelenting force. The fact that the other thing that about this guy is that he is just relentless. He will just keep coming no matter what you do. The amount of times he's been shot, stabbed, incinerated, whatever, he just keeps coming. I think that's the thing that, I think it's the inevitability that sort of scares a lot of people. That's also why, like I alluded to earlier, it made him a popular character in the game Dead by Daylight, which is a full-on horror game, and it's just watching characters just constantly come at you is the terrifying thing there. So yeah, I think that's what a lot of people sort of embody about Mike Myers.
I can't say Mike Myers and not think of Austin Powers.
I know. For the sake of my own sanity, I need to make some quips at his expense.
No, I agree with what everyone's saying. It's like very much that kind of blank canvas. Even films that I like, we've mentioned Scream earlier, they're going to take that mask off at the end and it's going to be someone you know. And then I think that kind of demystifies a lot of it. Freddy Krueger's very like that's his skin, like it's burnt, that's the whole thing. And he's such a personality. Like I love the Nightmare on Elm Street, but because he's kind of funny and he's kind of camp and that's a whole personality. But like we've said, those kind of masks that are neutral, that's terrifying. And this is very real, like especially in the original Halloween, stalking, especially like young women who were babysitters in the 70s. That's terrifying because that can happen today. Like, that's what's genuinely really terrifying. Whereas a man dressed as Ghostface running around really sort of silly and campy and then, turns out to be someone it's not as scary, I don't think.
It's the kind of like the unscariness that makes it scary. It's like the mundane, that makes it, like terrifying. I agree.
Yeah,
and
you
I think
can reflect your own kind of fears onto it, I think, because it's so blank.
Because even in this film, I think the scenes that Chris was mentioning earlier, like when he's going from house to house, like that one with like the fact that people are like, oh, watch out, like, there's somebody around and things. So then even in their preparation for that, for like them looking out the window and then him just like getting them from behind, that's quite a scary scenario. That lady sort of goes off with the curlers in her hair. And at one point when he goes past the baby, I was like, oh my God, he's not actually going to kill the baby, is he? Because genuinely you are at one point like, I would not put it past this guy to do that, And again, I think that's what's interesting of, if we are talking about this exploration of him, as Chris said, you don't want to go too much into it. You don't want to ruin it. But it's little things like that. Then you could, if this film just existed, number one and this one, that would be there to kind of go, well, is he a human? Is he a person? Because there's the baby thing. But like you said, Chris, then whatever, like they make a sequel and then there's something else in which then ruins that, So it's like, I think that as an insulated thing kind of works. The other thing I would mention, saw the strength for me as well, Chris, you were mentioning about like the mask and stuff, is the sound effects as well. I think they were really strong. I think that was something that needed to be powerful. And as we said, the music was fantastic. But I also think the sound effects were particularly great on this as well, in terms of building that atmosphere and kind of adding to the creepiness.
Oh yeah, the neck snap of the boy in the truck. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and the visuals of like the police, like when the torch is through that guy's head, that was giving me Brain Dead vibes again.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think they got everyone's heads like cast. They said that who they knew was going to be killed.
right.
They got molds of everyone's heads, so that's why it's so lifelike and that kind of silicon. It looks genuine and like this. Obviously, Scream does it as well, but it does the trick of like not turning away. So, like you said with that woman at the window,
Yeah.
it's like you see it, whereas normally that would be another cut. But it's like with CGI and prosthetics, like it looks amazing. So it's a lot more gorier than the first one.
Yeah, when he just trod on the professor, I did just audibly go, Jesus.
Yeah.
I do love that Michael has an artistry to his work as well. Famously, like he leaves these murdered set pieces in what he does, which is strange for such a lifeless character, but he's willing to illuminate his victim with a torch in the face. For no one else really.
Yeah.
It's not as if he's showing off to anyone. Like it's literally just him playing. It's weird. It's so strange. And like even in the first movie with the original where he's got the tombstone,
Yeah.
the bodies. It's again, it just adds another layer of what is this thing? What the hell is wrong with this thing?
Well, that's why I was concerned when we went to like the cemetery near the beginning of the film. I was like, oh, I hope we aren't literally going down the road of like, let's just do the like beat for beat, remake kind of approach. So I'm glad that they didn't, again, like, oh, where's the tombstone gone and all this kind of stuff. So, I was glad that there was enough references there to kind of follow the narrative gently, but not just be a beat for beat remake.
Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. So this week, we've got Sarah telling us about the behind-the-scenes, or little tidbits and trivia, etc. So, Sarah, tell us about what you found for us this time.
So Halloween 2018 was the biggest horror movie opening with a female lead, and also with a female lead who was over 55. And it's one of the biggest openings for any of the Halloween films. So I just think that's something worth noting. Nick Castle, we've already mentioned, was 70 when he filmed Halloween 2018. He appears as the Shape. There's the moment when he's reflected in the mirror when Laurie's looking up through the house. That's him. And it makes him the oldest actor to play Michael Myers. He's also the third actor to play him more than once behind George P. Wilbur, who is in Halloween 4 and Halloween the Curse of Michael Myers, and Tyler Mane and Halloween 2. So the date this film was released, I'm sure Chris was here, but in the UK and the USA, it was the day that Michael Myers was born, which was October 19th. So again, they're always paying homage, make sure fans get those little treats. So this is the third film to simply be titled Halloween, after the original 1978 film and the Rob Zombie's 2007 remake. So 3 films with just Halloween as their title. Jamie Lee Curtis stated that she regretted returning to the series in Halloween Resurrection 2002, which is why she had her character killed off in the latter. However, after reading the script by David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, and Jeff Fradley, the different direction that it took impressed her so much that she knew by page 4 that she wanted to be in it. She later credited the film as living up to the original. And the final one we have in this film, we have a trio of children who can be seen together wearing a skeleton mask, a witch mask, and a jack-o'-lantern mask. These are nearly identical to those in Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, in which the Silver Shamrock Company's masks are the driving plot device. There's lots of Easter eggs across the film, but we just have to mention that one as it was already come up on the Well Good Movies podcast. So what do you guys think about some of those?
Fantastic. I mean, thank you very much for doing that. I'm glad to see that Jamie Lee Curtis had a lot of faith in this film as well. Considering that by the point that this was coming around, she had a lot more sort of status and could easily have just said no to wanting to do this. So I'm glad they were able to win around quite thoroughly. And I think it just shows in the end product, because she is one of the standout elements of this. And to think that if she didn't agree to come back, God only knows what kind of story we would have been left with, or even just potentially an awkward replacement for her. What about you guys? What facts there stood out to people?
I do appreciate that they had the silver shamrock masks in it, because I think for a long time Halloween 3 was just looked at as the outlier. Understandably, it's not a Michael Myers story, but it is. I'd say it's rightly gained its cult status, and it's nice to see it nodded in that way and acknowledged in that way. Also, those 3 masks are really cool. The jack-o'-lantern, the skull, and the witch mask. They're really good.
Yeah, I was glad to see it because, again, I think, like you, Chris, I would have preferred this franchise to go down the kind of anthology route. I think when we talked about that film in a Halloween special, the idea was to talk about films that kind of reflected trick-or-treating. And the fact we talked about Trick or Treat, which literally has like different stories within it. I'm like, that goes so well with like Halloween, horror, so why can't we have more of that rather than just keep like, going back to these same characters all the time? It'd be so much cooler if Michael Myers was kind of this like mystery character, which was as part of one of these stories. And you went in each time like, what's it going to be this time? Who's going to come up? And I think that those 3 masks, regardless of, like Craig said earlier, it's a bit of a strange film, has some weird tangents in it, but the end of it does really stand out to me for this like kind of like horrific effects of the masks. So when I do see it, I'm like, oh God, it's them. So for it to acknowledge that within the same world, it's similar to like, I do appreciate this film of kind of, you have the whole cinematic universe effect these days of, people have talked about it with Mad Max of like, people saying like, oh, well, you can just regard the other films however you want to in terms of timelines. And then other stuff more recently has to be like, that guy died. What happened there? And like, how does this connect to that? And you can kind of get tied up in knots about that. So I like that this film kind of, with that teenager character earlier was just like, oh yeah, weren't you like his, didn't Laurie, wasn't she like his sister or something like that? She was like, no, that's something they did in TV and stuff. So I was like, again, it was just fun. It wasn't an obvious way, but they would reference in the entire franchise and kind of like explaining away why that happens. And I'm like, interesting approach to maybe say that all of these films happen within in-universe movies or something like that. So I like the Shamrocks stuff is similar in that it's like it's saying it's within the same worlds, within the same universe. And this is how we're kind of like referencing all the films in little bits.
I really liked how there's different. Obviously, we got Nick Castle back, who is the OG Michael Myers, but obviously it references that many actors have played this character, and I should have added that James Jude Courtney obviously plays him 3 times. He's Michael in across all these 3 films. And in hindsight, I went to a Comic-Con last year and he was there and Nick Castle was there. And I was like, oh my gosh, if only I'd watched these films soon, I would have definitely gone over because from what, I've seen all the 3 films, like I've said before. And I think he does a great job as a Michael and he's so practical. And he's like, I think he submerged himself. I think he lived with a hitman as well for a while to get in that kind of stealth role. So I think he's a great Michael. I think he's, up there with Nick, and I've not seen the others, but I think he's really great. And they clearly, they respect everyone that's been there before, and getting Nick back on for that tiny cameo, even though we didn't know it, I thought was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's great, like you said, for the success of the film as well, is when you look at like this having like such a big opening and it being such a big financial success for the franchise. It's interesting because you look at 2018 and that is like franchise city. You got like Mission Impossible, Avengers, Aquaman, like literally like all the films of that year is like Deadpool, Venom. It definitely is the times before COVID, because the box office was really different then. So it's almost like now is this like, are we now Halloween Ends and stuff like that is like come at the tail end of this kind of franchise fatigue, whereas that kind of emphasizes that maybe Halloween, this reboot, was at the high of like, oh yay, all these franchises are back, whereas now we're in this kind of like, give us original stuff kind of thing, like we're kind of sick of all of this. So yeah, that kind of demonstrates that as well, I guess. Cool. Right, so some great facts there and trivia. So that leads us now to our final segment, which is the movie vault, which we like to think of as a time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So our question this time is, should Halloween 2018 gain the honor of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? So I'm going to go to Chris on this one first, because again, often our representation of the movie vault, and I think he's got the biggest scope of knowing his disappointment with this trilogy, but also having so many of the films of the past in his head. What is your thoughts on this one?
So this, I'm going to say off the bat, and I'm going to explain why, but I am going to say no, but I do have a lot of reasons for it why. As a film on its own, it's a very good film. I'm looking at its budget now versus box, and I think it was made on a $10 million budget. That's very impressive. The film looks so good for $10 million in 2018 and 2017 as well. It's brilliant. It does look good. It does have its faults, but I don't think it's good enough to go in. But for a bigger reason why I don't think it's going to go in, it's kind of undone itself. I think the follow-up films really undoes a lot of the good work made in that movie. But also, this particular one, Halloween, has set quite a bad trend with some of the horror sequels or reboot sequels that have come out, like the Exorcist one that came out recently. I think there's another one that's come out, but they did it with Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well, which basically just ripped it off. So I think
Omen, I mentioned earlier. I think Omen is one that they've done recently.
That's it, the Omen, yeah.
Yeah, that's good though.
I haven't seen, but I think it's set kind of a bad precedent for this sort of idea of legacy sequel. And it wasn't just them. Particularly, it did it for horror. For what it did for horror, it's done that. But like a legacy sequel has been a big thing for a while. But I don't think it goes in because it's not. First of all, it's not the best Halloween sequel, and also like this is the vault, and if we're gonna put in any Halloween movie, it's obviously got to be the original. So this and it had to be just one, which I think it should be just one. It's not this one. With as much as I don't think it's a terrible film. I think it's got its faults. This is by far not good enough to go in the vault, in my personal opinion, despite its successes at the box and what it does achieve. I just don't think so. Not for me.
Interesting. So I'm going to go to Craig next again, because I think that, again, you mentioned there's something which possibly Craig might bring up, but yeah, see what he thinks.
Look, I I would happily say yes for this going in. However, I don't really have a horse in this race. If this doesn't go in, I'm not going to be heartbroken. If this goes in, I'm not going to be like celebrating. Two things I particularly want to base this response off of, which is it should only be one of the franchise, and that one being the first one, as well as what the sequels for this film end up doing to it. As someone who never intends on watching those sequels, I can live blissfully ignorant and just assume headcanon-wise that this film is effectively the end of that story and see that as the ending in and of itself, right? For me, I would personally find it weird to punish a film on the basis of what goes on to happen later. Because it's an individual film as opposed to, say, like a TV series that prides itself on like the entirety of the TV series. So I think that it's able to evaluate on those trends. With regards to, I obviously admit I think the first film is better. I think insofar as the tension built up, it is a significantly tighter film because of it. And the fact then it just doesn't allow sort of stupid moments to happen significantly. I want to make it clear, though, I don't think we've actually discussed the original to a significant extent that we're putting it in today. But also, I think that there are a number of different franchises where individual elements of them are able to do something so strong that it's worth pointing them out, even if it's not necessarily the highlight of that franchise. Like, I only need point out how many Star Wars films there are in the vault already, but the entirety of the anthology will never make it in, right? Like, I think it's 4 films that's currently in there, David? Yeah, so David's nodding and agreeing there. And that's because all of those films did something differently for the franchise, which is worth credit. And I think given that one of the things that we all agree on is the idea of just how powerful the sort of exploration of the Michael Myers PTSD necessarily is, that's something that I don't see an awful lot of films want to tackle. So I would personally give my vote for yes. The only thing that I would say is I don't think it should go in yet. I think we should wait until October until we actually put it in, just out of sheer principle.
Also thinking about it, there might be 5 Star Wars films in there. But yeah, I see what you mean there as well. And I think it's interesting to think of, talking about like the element of like insulated with the film on its own as opposed to what it has baggage wise, because sometimes we do say, oh well, should this represent this person's career, or should this be there for this reason, should this be there for this reason? So I think that, like with Avatar, the one I always bring up, again, like is that good enough to put in there just for like 3D technology and stuff? And ultimately it was no. So I can kind of see both sides here, in which like Chris is saying like, well, this is kind of like also a bad representation of this kind of reboot culture, and which you had an opportunity to do something, and the way in which it was written even had a kind of like cliffhanger. So they're setting up a sequel to an extent, but even then the first one could be argued they did that as well. Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm very much similar with Chris on this one. My instinct was no, but there is obviously a lot of good reasons. Like we've alluded to, it's the start of that kind of recrawl reboot. Like, I think Scream was the next one to do it in 2022, and then it all kind of was a domino effect from there, really. So it
all
did
right,
change.
Sarah, like Scream is the trendsetter. We get it.
Yeah, Scream, get me back on for Scream. Yeah, no, but it did, like, if Halloween 2018 didn't happen, I don't think Scream 2022 would have happened. So you kind of have to give it respect in that sense. But I don't think it should go in. I agree with Chris. I think the OG should go in. I know that's not what we're talking about, but that was more pivotal in changing the way in which we see final girls, we see slashers. Like, it was just there. John Carpenter's director and Jamie Lee Curtis, like, a first feature film. Like, it just changed the game. This one, it is a good film. It's decent. It's not perfect, obviously, but for me, I just don't think it's that impactful to put in the vault, whereas something like the OG would be. So it's a no from me.
Yeah, so I think where I come down on this then is that I think the film, like I said, I think it's effective, it has a lot of great moments, but I think, yeah, maybe not just standalone enough that it goes into the vault. But I do also agree with Craig. I don't think we've talked about the original enough to go in. I take your guys' points. I think that, you know, if something was to go in from this franchise, it would be that. But I think I also, you know, maybe like Craig said, that conversation could possibly happen at the appropriate time of the year. So whether we will return to this year, who knows? But I think for now, Halloween 2018, unfortunately, does not go into the movie vault. Do you agree at home? Should we watch, you know, Halloween, the original, and discuss that one in the future and then decide its fate? Let us know. But for now, we go to the end game. Will it end? Will it kill? Who knows? Over to Craig.
We're in the end game now.
It's so annoying.
Okay, endgame time. So I know everyone is expecting me to be thematic to this film and set some form of horror-based endgame that everyone can get involved in. However, I think we all understand why I'm morally opposed to that. So this is what I like to call the season-appropriate holiday game. What I've decided... Don't you dare roll your eyes at me, Sarah. Don't you dare. Right.
I was there like nodding because I was like, me and Craig was psychically, I was like, we should do something about like season appropriateness. So yeah, we were on the same wavelength there.
Right. So
Maybe
what have
not
I
Sarah.
done? Obviously, this is currently the summer, and I think that there is a large, varying genre of films which is known as like the summer film. So whether that just be, say, summer blockbusters, beach movies, sort of teen exploration films, it's a wide-ranging sort of genre. But also there are just lots of like hard-hitting films set at summer that utilize sort of the summery atmosphere for the stories as well. You also have a lot of, say, romance films. You have lots of sort of like brash wealth showing off elements. So what I've decided to do is I've gone on IMDb and I've taken the 15 highest ranked summer related films, and what we're going to do is a very interesting game. What's going to happen is, over the course of this game, you are going to choose 5 of those films each, and then we're going to add up their rank together to see which one has the closest to the highest ranking score. So in this situation, say that you answered the questions, you chose the films which were like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We'd add up all those numbers together, and that would be the best possible score you could get, because there's no way that someone could have lower than... I believe the score, if you add those 5 numbers together, is 15. Yeah. So that's what you're looking for. You're trying to get the highest ranked films to get the lowest score possible. But how do you decide which order you're going to choose your films? Easy. I have 5 questions about summer in films, whether that just be about summary films, summer-related plots within films, and then whoever is quickest to answer will get to choose a film there and then. The other person has to wait until later. So there's a possibility that the films that you think are higher ranked are taken by someone else. Is everyone clear on the rules?
So the idea is to get the 5 highest. Is that what it is?
That is correct, yeah. Or 5 of the highest.
Okay, 5 of the highest.
Yeah. So, before we go into the full game, I'm just going to tell you the 15 films so that you could start thinking about which ones that might be, so you can get your eyes on them early. So, the 15 highest ranked films on this list: 12 Angry Men, 500 Days of Summer, Adventureland, American Graffiti, Betty Blue, Dazed and Confused, Do the Right Thing, Dog Day Afternoon, Falling Down, Jaws, Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, National Lampoon's Vacation, Rear Window, The 7-Year Itch, and Stand By Me. So as you can see, a wide range of different kinds of films. That's because the summer is interesting. And maybe when we're in summer, we should talk about the summer and not frickin' Halloween!
Definitely the first time the National Lampoon's Vacation and Rear Window have appeared next to each other.
That's the double bill.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see that's the Lampoon's Rear Window.
Yeah.
So we need to know exactly what it is that we're playing for. So as usual, this will help determine what film we discuss in the next episode. So I'm going to start with mine. So my film's from 2001, and I think it's safe to say that I am a little bit peeved at the fact that we're discussing an autumn holiday in the summer. So I figured what better way to sort of get things back on track and actually choose a film which is very much about the summer, very much about one of probably the most important things about summer for a lot of people, for a lot of children especially, which is the idea of the summer holidays. And this film, in the same way that say Halloween really bigs up the excellent elements of Halloween itself, this film shows us what's really special about the summer holidays and why it should be preserved for all time. And it's also relevant for two reasons. One, in Wales at the moment, we're currently having discussions of whether or not we're going to actually have the summer holidays shortened. So it's politically relevant. But two, one of the actors within this film recently passed away. So in the same way that, say, we're honoring dead characters coming back to life, I think it's good to give this guy one last hurrah and talk about his most iconic character going forward. I'll be interested to see if anyone's actually identified what this film is. Okay, so that's my pitch. So from 2001. Let's go to Sarah then. So tell us about what you'd suggest.
My film is from 2006. It's a very loose connection. I thought with Halloween, we've had a lot of comedic elements. So I thought, let's go with like a straight up comedy with this one. And not to mention, it also has a really great, empowered older woman as our lead, who's also a silver fox. It was another great actress. So yes, that's my sort of loose connections. But I think this will be a real treat and is going to get you in a much happier mood, Craig. I can tell.
Okay, excellent. So we've got the comedy from 2006. Chris, tell us about what you'd suggest.
So mine is from 1987. Figured I'd go back a century. Not full century, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Mine is in the same way that Halloween 2018 serves as both a sequel and a reboot. This film serves as a sequel, reboot / remake, all in one go.
Okay, interesting. So we're continuing down the line, potentially, of the sequel, reboot, remakes.
This is arguably one of the first examples of it, or one of the most famous examples of a recanonization of a series.
Okay.
What year was it again? Sorry.
1987. And finally, we go to David.
So I'm going to carry on with the theme of the sort of franchise being carried on a long time later. So with this film, it's got similar elements to it. Again, we're getting away from the horror kind of Halloween vibes. And with it being summer again, we're going into the more kind of like supernatural, superhero kind of stuff. But again, this is not traditionally like based on like comic books or anything like that from like some of the big wigs like Marvel, DC. But it's definitely one that then takes something which was like came out a long time ago, or not too long ago, but like which people remembered, then had, you know, a follow-up film, which this one is then connected to. And another reason I bring this one up is also similar to Chris's experience of watching the Halloween franchise, because in a similar way, I remember when I saw this film, I was very much like on board with it halfway through, and by the end I was angry. I was so angry by the end that it had just fallen off a cliff and turned into this horrible crap of film. So I thought they'd be interesting to discuss that. So my film is from 2019.
Okay, I have a feeling I know what you want to do. Actually, no, I don't. Okay. So that's the range of films that we have in front of us. Which one will be discussed? We'll find out now when we get to the game. So, Are you ready for the first question?
Yes.
Okay. So the question number 1. So this isn't completely devoid of horror. I have left some elements in there just because to be thematic to the game, and also because I realized the last time that Chris played one of my games, I did rob him a little bit of horror. So the first question is, what is the murder weapon in the film I Know What You Did Last Summer? Chris.
It's a hook.
You are correct. It is a hook. So, you get a pick of whatever film you want for your first one.
I will go with Jaws.
Solid
Okay,
choice.
fantastic. And then what will happen is, basically, once we've gone through the questions, however many the other person has left, we'll get to choose from those. Okay? Question number 2. Which film contains the song In Summer? Sarah?
Frozen.
That is correct. So, which film would you like as your first?
I'm going to stick with my Linklater roots and go Dazed and Confused.
Okay, fantastic. Question number 3. Which 2 characters detail their meeting via the song Summer Nights? Sarah?
Grease.
I'm afraid I can't accept because that is the name of a film and not the name of 2 characters. So, Chris, do you happen to know the names of the characters that may or may not be the leads of Grease?
Yeah. I genuinely don't know their names. I've not seen Grease.
Oh my god.
Would you like to just guess the name of a guy and a girl? Because let's face it.
Is it Sandy and I don't know. What's John Travolta's goddamn name? Genuinely can't remember it. Joey? I don't know.
Oh, so close.
Oh, you guessed the girl correctly. It is Sandy. I think at this point, we do, for the sake of just actually having choices, we do have to pass over. So Sarah,
Oh, Sandy and Danny.
this is correct. So you now get to choose your next film.
I'm going to go with Adventureland.
Okay. However, given the fact that he was so close, I am going to allow Chris to choose one of his options now. So,
I'll go with Stand By Me.
okay, fantastic. So, number 4. Which film contains the quote, "I wish I knew how to quit you"? Sarah?
Shit.
Oh,
Oh, no. Is it The Notebook?
it is not The Notebook. Chris, what is it? It is Brokeback Mountain.
Oh, of course, my man Jake.
Okay, so Chris, what would you like as your third film?
Let's go with Dog Day Afternoon.
Okay.
It's a good movie.
Quality film.
All right, fantastic. And finally, we now go to question number 5. Before we go for the free-for-all, I'll explain what happens in the next part. So, in the film Us, where does the main character Adelaide first find her doppelganger?
Sarah.
Sarah?
The Mirror Maze at the Fun Fair?
I can accept that. I've got in a funhouse / Hall of Mirrors. So, fantastic. So, pick your third film.
I'm going to go with Do the Right Thing.
We've got Do the Right Thing. Fantastic. So, at this point, you have chosen 3 films each. That means you have 2 films left. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to work out which films you want and shout them out. Fastest first gets them.
we say both at the same time?
At the same time.
Oh God.
Okay. And David, I will need your help to listen out to what they're saying. 5, 4, 3, 2,
12 Angry
1.
Men.
500 Days of Summer.
So I can award 12 Angry Men to Chris, and I can award 500 Days of Summer to Sarah. You have one film left each. I'll do another 5 seconds. 5.
American
4.
Graffiti.
I will give American Graffiti to Chris.
I didn't want it anyway.
And Sarah, in this case, there's no pressure. Just let us know.
Have we taken Rear Window?
Rear Window has not been claimed.
Yeah, let's take it. Let's take Bart Simpson with a broken leg.
Fantastic.
All right, then. So in that case, we now come to the score part. What I'll do is I'm going to go through the list alphabetically and tell you what rank out of the 15 it is. So we'll start working out your score from then. Okay, so Chris, so you had 12 Angry Men. That was ranked 9th.
Ooh.
Sarah, you had 500 Days of Summer. That was ranked 11th. Sarah, you had Adventureland. That was ranked 15th.
Oh.
Ooh.
Chris, you had American Graffiti. That was ranked 8th.
This is like the Eurovision award, like awarding the audience points.
Sarah, you had Dazed and Confused. That was 4th.
Yeah.
Sarah, you also had Do the Right Thing. That was ranked 3rd.
Ooh.
Whoa. That's a surprise.
Ooh.
The actual gasp that Chris gave.
Because you were like right down there, and now you're right.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Chris. You had Dog Day Afternoon. That was ranked 6th. Also, Chris. You had Jaws. Jaws was number 1 on the list.
Yeah.
So that means you both have one film left each. At this point, I'm just going to reveal what the current scores are. Sarah, at the moment, you are scoring 33. Chris is scoring 24. So there is still a chance. There is still a chance that these last scores are pivotal. Sarah, your final film then on the list was Rear Window. That was number 5. So you were able to identify the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th highest, which means your final score comes to a grand total of 38. So, Chris, if your film is 14th on this list, it means it goes to a tie. You have chosen Stand By Me. That was the 2nd film on the list.
Wow.
So you identified the 1st and the 2nd on the list, which means that the final score for you is 26, which means that Chris has the lowest score of the two, which means that Chris is the winner of today's Endgame.
Well done, Chris.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everyone. That was really fun.
Sarah's still hunting that win.
Yeah, it's one that came to me today. I thought it would be nice and suspenseful, living up to what Halloween did.
True.
But the question now is, what are we going to be dealing with for next episode? So, give us a little bit more detail about the film that we'll be covering, and then finally tell us what are we looking at next episode.
So,
well, which one he's choosing as well.
yeah, that's a point. Yeah, we can choose. I'm trying to remember what it was, because yours, Craig, was a 2001 summer movie that has was it a recently deceased actor?
I believe that this is what the news has told me. Yeah.
Sarah, yours was 2006 and was
Comedy with
comedy.
a badass older woman.
Badass old woman, 2006. And then yours, David, was a film that you started liking and then hated by the end, and it was 1990.
2019.
2019.
2019, excuse me. I completely mistaken. Well, it is tempting to go with David's film that careened off a cliff, because that could be quite fun. But there is also 2001 and 2006 are such interesting times because they're long ago enough now that they feel retro. I'm gonna go with Craig's.
Yeah.
Okay. First things first, David, do you have any idea what I've chosen?
No.
Sarah, do you have any idea what I've chosen?
Think about Lord of the Rings because that guy died, but you've done that recently.
Yes.
Yeah, and
To
okay.
be fair, we can't trust Craig's record on whether people have died on this podcast.
True.
No. So this guy is definitely dead. It's just a question of whether it was recently. But I saw a post that implied it was recently.
Okay.
All right then. So just to be a bit more clear about my film, then. So just to double check, you're absolutely choosing mine, Chris.
Yeah, I'll go with yours.
All right. Thank you. So to guarantee that this film is obviously not about a holiday, but a time of year. So, like I said, this is a film which is basically about the summer holidays. And this is very important to a lot of people, but specifically to children. So this is a children's animated film from 2001. It's based on a very popular, or at least was popular at the time, Saturday morning cartoon, which obviously followed a group of 6 popular children. Popular to us. Some of them were not so well liked. I think David now has realized what we're in for.
Not quite. I'm just cheering like I just thinking of where we've been down this road before, but carry on.
Right. So this is a film basically set at school, and they're just about to go into their
God,
summer holidays.
Yes.
And this is a film where
Yes.
they fight against the authorities who
Yeah.
are trying to eliminate summer, therefore eliminate the summer holidays. That's right. Next episode, we are looking at Recess School's Out.
Yeah.
Attention, students. This is Principal Brickley talking. I want to inform you all that I have a fat, saggy butt, which I like to scratch every hour on the hour.
Get ready for a recess movie so big,
Why, Principal Brickley, sir. What a surprise.
it takes a theater to hold it.
Summer vacation, the ultimate recess.
They thought school was over,
Break in! Erase the access code!
but the mystery was just beginning.
I am gonna get rid of recess.
Mom! TJ, are you all right? Those guys at the school, they're doing some kind of evil experiment.
That bonk on the head must have rattled your little brain.
But, Mom!
You're feverish. You wait right here. I'll go get the baby thermometer and the petroleum jelly.
Okay, that right there, that was messed up.
Now, they're going to save the world, one playground at a time.
Get off our planet, alien scum! Ninjas!
I'm stuck! Curse these bodacious hips of mine! Randall, run back to my place and get the butter!
That part still grosses me out, sir. Get him.
It's a recess unlike any you've ever experienced.
Psychedelic Principalia. It's party time.
On February 16th, recess will never be the same again.
We're going in.
And no running in the halls!
Recess, school's out.
Dad!
TJ, did you run into the sliding glass door again?
Come back! Your mom's gonna want to take your temperature!
Coming only to theaters February 16th.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that choice. Very happy with that choice.
Yes.
And you are right. It was the
Principal Prick, the actor who plays Principal Prick, who has recently died.
That was the bit that threw me. I was like, I can't think of like who's died recently, which
because
would, like...
somebody shared it with his with a monologue of his from this film, which is basically about here's why you need to enjoy the time that you have as a children because it's so fleeting.
Right. I thought like...
Go on.
No, I was like, it can't be Robin Williams because it's not recent. So it's just the fact that you said like this character symbolized that person. So I was like thinking somebody like that, but no, makes sense.
But of course, this is me inadvertently suggesting another thing produced by the Disney,
the mouse,
the Disney engine. So David, where can we watch this film?
Where could we possibly watch this film? You can catch it on Disney Plus as part of your subscription. You can also buy it and rent it on places like Apple TV and also many other sort of rental services such as Amazon Prime. And at the moment, I think Crunchyroll is coming up, but that might just be an advert. I don't know.
Sorry, Crunchyroll?
So that's what I thought. I was like, that's like anime and stuff usually, isn't it?
It is anime.
Yeah, so... Oh, I think it just says watch similar movies on Crunchyroll for free. So I think that's just it, like playing with me.
That's probably like My Hero Academia.
Yeah. So yeah, you can catch this on Disney Plus as part of your subscription. You catch it on places like Apple TV and Amazon, or I don't know, maybe you got a VHS or a DVD out there somewhere which you can pop in. Yeah, definitely a favorite of mine. Can't wait to talk about Kung Fu Miss Groki. So cool. Right. Thank you, guys. That was a very challenging and interesting end game there. And thank you, Craig, for that suggestion. Definitely going into the summer vibes there. I was thinking like, oh, how can you get like, the pure summer vibes? But yeah, a very good choice. I'd be interested to know how some of those end game ones are classed as like summer films. But I'm sure we'll soon find out. But yeah, let us know at home.
Take it up with IMDb as far as I can see.
Let us know at home what you think anyway of the film we'll be discussing next time, maybe what you would have chosen. What do you think of Halloween from 2018? Would you want us to talk about the original one? What should we talk about our Halloween special, which is obviously coming up very soon, /October. Chris, you'll have to leave your narration for another time on that one now. And yeah, it's been great talking all about this film. Even though it's a bit unseasonal, but it's always fun diving into another franchise, something which is sort of, got its pros, got its cons. So we had a very interesting conversation talking all about it. Thank you for both joining us once again. So it was a pleasure having you over in VHS Corner, Sarah, and thank you for helping us with Movie Vault, Chris. Everyone at home, you can catch their socials in the description of this podcast if you want to know where to find them or see more content from them. And of course you can do the same with us. You can catch all the socials in the description to catch us on places like Instagram, YouTube, and X, Twitter, whatever that thing's called at the moment. So thank you, everyone. Had loads of fun, and we'll catch you next time for Recess. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.